Experience the kinetic glow of a life in constant motion, where every choice creates a ripple that changes the world forever. Our 3D visuals capture the energy and the passion of those who lived every second to the absolute fullest. Subscribe today and feel the power of motion.
The moment my aunt set her casserole dish on the table, something in my chest went tight. I don't know how else to describe it. It wasn't a sound, wasn't a smell. My mother was already passing the bread basket to my uncle. My cousin was pouring sweet tea into the wrong glasses. My father was laughing at something my brother-in-law had said. Everything was normal. Everything looked exactly the way it always did at Thanksgiving. But my mother had gone still. Not frozen, not obvious, just still. The way a person goes still when they're trying to listen for something underneath all the noise. I noticed because I know her. I've known her my whole life. And in 38 years, I have never once seen my mother hold a dinner roll for 45 seconds without taking a single bite. I watched her eyes move slowly around the table. She didn't look at me. She looked at my aunt, my father's younger sister, Vivian, who had driven 4 hours to be here and who was now arranging the serving spoon on the casserole with a little too much care, a little too much attention for a side dish. Then my mother looked down at her plate. Then she looked at me, and that was when she picked up her napkin, pressed it to her mouth like she was dabbing her lips, and set it back down on the table. Underneath it, folded small, was a piece of paper. I only saw it because I was already watching her. She didn't gesture toward it. She didn't gesture toward it. She didn't nod at it. She simply rested her hand near the edge of the napkin, and when she reached for her water glass, her pinky finger gave the tiniest push. The paper slid half an inch toward my plate. My heart was already moving faster than I could explain. I picked up my own napkin, the way you do when you're about to wipe your mouth, and I brought it and the folded paper to my face at the same time, unfolded it with one hand, hidden in the cloth, 4 words, "Don't eat the casserole." I set the napkin back down. I did not look at my mother. I picked up my fork and moved green beans around my plate and tried to remember how to breathe normally. Vivian had made the casserole. Sweet potato with a brown sugar pecan crust, my father's favorite since childhood. She'd texted about it 3 days ago, made a point to mention it in the group chat. Can't wait to see everyone. Bringing Walter's casserole. Just like Mom used to make. My father had replied with 3 exclamation points. He never uses exclamation points. He never uses exclamation points. She had driven 4 hours with that casserole in a thermal bag in the back seat of her car. I pressed my fork down on a green bean and tried to look like a person having a normal Thanksgiving. My brother was serving himself from the casserole dish. A large spoonful. He loves sweet potato, anything. He was already reaching for the serving spoon before Vivian had even finished positioning the dish on the table. I looked at my mother. She was watching him. She hadn't touched the casserole either, I realized. She'd accepted it when Vivian passed it, spooned a polite amount into her plate, and then hadn't touched it again. I'd assumed she was pacing herself, the way she always does at big meals, saving room, eating slowly. Now I understood she'd done it deliberately. She'd made it look like she was eating everything. My father, though, my father had taken 2 helpings. I excused myself to use the restroom. The moment I turned the corner into the hallway, I leaned against the wall and pressed my hand over my mouth. My legs felt strange. I stood there for a full minute, just breathing. What was I supposed to do? Walk back to the table and knock the casserole dish onto the floor? Tell my brother to stop eating? Say out loud at Thanksgiving dinner with my aunt sitting right there, "I think there's something wrong with the food"? My mother had slipped me that note for a reason. She didn't want me to alert anyone. Not yet. I went to the bathroom, ran cold water over my wrists the way my mother taught me when I was 12 and overwhelmed, and looked at myself in the mirror for a long time. Vivian had been having problems. I knew that much. The whole family knew, in the vague, politely avoided way that families know things they don't want to examine directly. She'd been passed over for the executor role when my grandparents' estate was settled 4 years ago. My father had gotten it instead, not because anyone doubted her, he'd said at the time, but because he lived closer to the attorney, closer to the property. It was just logistically simpler. Vivian had smiled and said, of course, no hard feelings. But there had been a comment at Christmas 2 years ago, a remark about the property in Tennessee, about how certain decisions had been made without her input. My father had apologized, said it was just paperwork, said everything would be divided fairly in the end. And then 8 months ago, there'd been the phone call. I hadn't been in the room, but I'd heard my mother's voice through the wall of my old bedroom, low and careful, the voice she uses when she's trying to de-escalate. I'd heard her say, "That's not how it works, Vivian, and you need to speak to an attorney about this, not to us." Vivian had felt cheated. That was the word my mother used afterward, quietly, to my father when they thought I was asleep. She feels cheated, Walter, and I don't think she's going to let it go. But this was Thanksgiving. We were family. Whatever hard feelings existed, we were sitting at the same table eating the same food, except my mother wasn't eating it. I came back to the table. The conversation had moved on to something about football. My uncle was making a point. My cousin was on her phone under the table, which she thought no one could see. My brother had pushed his plate to the side and was leaning back in his chair with the specific satisfaction of a man who has eaten well. My father reached for the casserole dish again. My mother said, "Walter?" Just his name? Nothing else. He looked at her. "Let it settle," she said. "You always overdo it." He made a face, the good-natured, exasperated face he's been making at her for 39 years, and put the serving spoon down. I didn't breathe for several seconds. Vivian was watching my mother. There was something in her expression I didn't have a name for. Not anger. Not guilt, exactly. It was the face of a person doing very careful arithmetic. 20 minutes later, my brother said he didn't feel right. He said it quietly at first. Said his stomach was bothering him, probably ate too fast. My sister-in-law touched his arm. He shook his head, said he was fine. Then he went the color of old newspaper and grabbed the edge of the table. My sister-in-law screamed his name. He didn't fall. He slumped. There's a difference, though. In the moment, it didn't matter. What mattered was the sound he made, this low, involuntary sound, and the way his whole body seemed to go soft in the chair. My cousin knocked her sweet tea across the tablecloth. My uncle stood up so fast his chair went back into the wall. My father was around the table before I'd even fully registered what was happening. He had my brother by the shoulders. My mother was already on her feet. She said, very clearly, to my uncle, "Call 911, right now." And then she turned to Vivian. I have thought about my mother's face in that moment many times since. It wasn't rage, it wasn't triumph or accusation or any of the things you might expect. It was just resolved. Like something in her had been waiting for this and had decided well in advance exactly what came next. She said, "Vivian, what did you put in it?" Not a question. She didn't frame it as a question. The table went so quiet I could hear the football game still playing in the other room. Vivian said, "I don't know what you're talking about." My mother said, "You haven't touched a single bite of your own dish. I've been watching you all evening." And that was it. That was the tell. That was the thing my mother had seen from across the table while she was pretending to eat dinner rolls. Vivian had brought the casserole, had talked about it for 3 days, had driven 4 hours with it, and she had not taken a single serving for herself. I looked at Vivian's plate. Green beans, rolls, turkey, no sweet potato. My mother had noticed that before I'd even unfolded the note. Vivian's face did something complicated. She said, "I'm watching my sugar." She said it very fast, the way people say things they have prepared in advance. My mother said, "Then you won't mind waiting with us for the ambulance." My uncle was on the phone in the hallway. My father was kneeling next to my brother, who was conscious and confused and kept saying, I'm fine," in the voice of someone who was not fine. My sister-in-law was crying. My cousin had put her phone on the table, face up, like she'd forgotten it existed. Vivian stood up. My mother said, "Sit down, Vivian." She said it the same way she'd said everything else. Quiet, no drama, completely immovable. Vivian sat down. I don't know what I had expected her to do. Run, maybe, in some panicked movie version of events. But she sat down and she folded her hands on the table and she stared at the tablecloth and she didn't say anything else. The ambulance came in 9 minutes. The paramedics were efficient and calm and used words I only half understood. They took my brother's vitals, asked about allergies, asked what he'd eaten. My mother told them, very specifically, that she believed the casserole may have been contaminated and that it should be preserved. One of the paramedics looked at her for a moment, then looked at Vivian, then looked back at her and said, "We'll make note of that, ma'am." My sister-in-law went in the ambulance with my brother. 2 police officers arrived 15 minutes later after my uncle had made a second call. They were not the first responders. I think my uncle had called the non-emergency line initially and then called back. They asked my mother to explain what she'd observed. She did, in the same steady, matter-of-fact voice she uses when she's giving directions. She told them about the note. She told them about watching Vivian's plate all evening. She told them about the phone call 8 months ago, about the estate dispute, about the comment at Christmas. One of the officers asked Vivian if she'd like to explain her understanding of events. Vivian said she wanted a lawyer. After that, everything happened the way things happen in the aftermath of something terrible, in pieces and out of order. Someone made coffee. My cousin sat on the couch with her hands clasped so tight her knuckles were pale. My father stood in the kitchen for a long time with his back to everyone, and I didn't go to him yet because I could see he needed that moment to be private. I sat next to my mother. She had a mug of coffee in her hands she hadn't drunk from. She was looking at the wall above the fireplace, the family photo from my cousin's wedding, the one where my brother is making a ridiculous face in the back row. I said, "When did you know?" She was quiet for a moment. "I wasn't sure," she said. "Not completely. But something was wrong the moment she walked in." "What was it?" She thought about it. "She was too cheerful," she said. "Vivian has been cold with us for months, wouldn't return calls, didn't come to your father's birthday in September. And then she drives 4 hours and she's light, relaxed." I kept thinking about why a person who's been that angry would suddenly seem so relieved. She took a sip of coffee. And then she sat down and I watched her serve herself and she skipped her own dish. Just moved right past it. She'd been talking about that casserole for 3 days. And she didn't take any. "That's when you wrote the note." "That's when I excused myself to get more napkins," she said. "Yes." I leaned my head against her shoulder. She smelled like she always smells. Her perfume and something underneath it that I've never been able to name, that I've known my whole life. That means her. "You should have warned everyone," I said, not accusingly. "I know," she said. I was afraid if I said anything out loud, I don't know. I wasn't sure enough. I didn't want to accuse her in front of the family and be wrong. I thought if I could just get you away from the table. She stopped. "I should have warned your father too. I've been going over that. He's okay. He only had 1 full serving," she said. "The paramedic said that matters. My brother spent 2 nights in the hospital. The toxicology came back. Something called colchicine, a medication used for gout, that is, in large doses, acutely poisonous. It causes gastrointestinal distress, then attacks the organs if enough is consumed." My brother had eaten less than Vivian had likely planned. He'd served himself before the casserole was fully passed around, and his portion, while large, had been from the top layer, which apparently had a lower concentration. My father had eaten from the middle of the dish. The doctor said his second helping was fortunate to be small. I didn't tell him that for a week. I didn't want him to think about what would have happened if my mother hadn't set a dinner roll down and just watched. Vivian was charged. There were other details that came out in the months after. A life insurance policy my father hadn't known about, financial records that told their own story, a search history on her laptop that the prosecutor described in terms I won't repeat here. The estate dispute had become something else in her mind, something that had been sitting there getting darker for 4 years. She pleaded guilty 8 months later. I wasn't in the courtroom. My father was. My mother was. I stayed home and cleaned the house and cooked dinner and waited for them to call, which they did, from the parking garage outside the courthouse. My father's voice steadier than I'd expected. "It's done," he said. "My brother is completely fine. That is the thing I come back to when any of this starts to feel unmanageable. He is fine. He coaches his son's little league team on weekends. He texts me memes about football I don't understand. He called me on my birthday and talked for 40 minutes about his backyard renovation project and didn't mention that night once, which is exactly how he processes things, and I love him for it. My father doesn't talk about Vivian. I think he is still working out what it means to grieve someone who is still alive, someone who sat across from you at every Thanksgiving of your childhood and who chose, deliberately, to do what she did. I don't push him on it. Some things need a very long time. My mother and I had dinner together a few weeks after the sentencing. Just the two of us at a restaurant she likes in the town where I grew up. The Italian place that's been there since I was a child and still has the same checkered tablecloths. We ordered the same thing we always order. We talked about my niece's school play and whether my father needed a new car and whether I was seeing anyone. Near the end of dinner, she said, "You've been wanting to ask me something." I said, "Am I that obvious?" She smiled. She has a very small smile, my mother. It doesn't take up a lot of real estate on her face, but when it arrives, you know it. I said, "Were you scared?" She thought about it. Really thought about it, the way she thinks about everything, not reaching for the easy answer, not performing something for my benefit. "Not in the moment," she said. "In the moment I was just focused. There was only one thing that mattered, and I was trying to do it without making a scene before I was sure enough." "What about after?" She looked at her wine glass. "After," she said, "I was terrified. When your brother made that sound," she stopped. "Started again. That came later. The fear came later." I reached across the table and put my hand over hers. She turned her hand over and squeezed mine. I don't know how to explain my mother to people who haven't met her. She's not dramatic. She doesn't take up a lot of space in a room. She's the kind of person who remembers everyone's coffee orders and folds the towels with the seams facing in and sends cards for birthdays that aren't hers to manage. People who don't know her well think she's quiet, easygoing, pleasant. But I have watched her for 38 years. I know what it looks like when she goes still. I know what it means when she holds a dinner roll for 45 seconds. I know what it costs her to sit at a table with a feeling she can't prove yet and say nothing. Nothing loud, nothing that would cause a scene, nothing that couldn't be taken back, and wait until she's sure, quietly rerouting the situation, quietly removing the one person she could reach without alerting anyone else. She protected me the only way she could in that moment. And then she held the line. I have thought about what that evening would have looked like if she hadn't seen what she saw. If she'd been distracted or tired or had just assumed the cheerfulness was genuine and let it go. If my father had taken that third helping. If my brother had eaten more. I try not to stay in that version of events for too long. What I come back to instead is this. My mother at a Thanksgiving table, surrounded by family and noise and football on the television in the other room, watching a serving spoon get passed around a dish she had already decided she didn't trust. Patient, certain, already writing the note. She isn't a dramatic person. She didn't shout or confront or make a scene. She folded 4 words into a napkin and slid it across an inch of tablecloth. And those 4 words were enough. I tell people sometimes, when the subject comes up, that my mother is one of the most perceptive people I've ever met. They usually nod in a polite way that means they're hearing me, but not quite absorbing it. That's okay. Some things you have to sit across a table from to understand. I've spent a lot of time thinking about what actually saves people, not in the dramatic sense, not heroics, not luck, not being in the right place. I mean the quieter thing. The decision to keep paying attention when everyone else has relaxed into the comfort of a normal evening. My mother didn't have proof that night. She had a feeling, and she had one specific detail that didn't add up. Vivian hadn't touched her own dish. That was it. That was everything. And from that single observation, she made a choice to act carefully, quietly, without causing a scene she couldn't take back. She didn't panic. She didn't freeze. She folded 4 words into a napkin and pushed it across an inch of tablecloth. I think about that a lot. The discipline it requires to feel something that urgent and still move that slowly. There's a version of this story where Vivian gets away with it, where my mother second guesses herself, where she thinks, I'm probably wrong, I don't want to make a scene, it's a holiday, this is family. That version exists. It almost happened. The only thing standing between that version and this one was my mother's willingness to trust what she noticed and act on it, even when acting on it was uncomfortable, even when she had no proof. What Vivian did came from years of letting a wound fester instead of healing it. The estate dispute was real. The hurt was probably real, at least in the beginning, but somewhere along the way, she stopped grieving the unfairness and started planning around it. And those are two very different things. One is painful but human. The other is a choice, made over and over again, until it becomes something you can't take back. She drove 4 hours with that casserole. She'd had months to change her mind. She didn't. And the consequences of that, the years ahead of her, the things she lost, the family she destroyed from the inside, those are the direct result of every small choice she made in the wrong direction. That's not fate, that's just how it works. What we do accumulates. The person we become is made up of all the moments we chose one thing over another. Honesty over resentment, patience over impulse, restraint over the easier, darker option. And sometimes the distance between a life that holds together and one that falls apart completely is exactly that, the accumulated weight of small decisions made in private when no one was watching. My mother spent 39 years paying attention. Not to drama, not to conflict, to the small things. The dinner roll held too long. The serving spoon passed too quickly, the cheerfulness that arrived where coldness had lived for months. She built that kind of attention slowly, through a lifetime of caring about the people at her table. That's what protected us. Not luck. Not a dramatic intervention. A lifetime of noticing. I want to be that kind of person. I don't know if I'm there yet, but I think about my mother holding that dinner roll, watching Vivian's plate, saying nothing. And I think that's what real strength actually looks like. Not loud, not showy, just steady and awake and unwilling to look away.